Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and turn off your phones. We will begin shortly.
So we need to time it right now. Yes, they have, but somebody has to change this line. I mean, to open the file.
Okay, maybe just wait here for
Because when they start, I have to control for the microphone. So I cannot be open this right file.
I'm going to make an announcement and then they're going to start. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and turn off your phones. We will begin now.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the meeting is called to order. I am pleased now to assume the responsibilities of Session Chair for our consideration of Agenda Item 3, Policy Perspectives Towards a Resource-Efficient Asia-Pacific Region. The document pertinent to this agenda item is, as indicated in the annotated agenda, Sustainable Management of Natural Resources in Asia and the Pacific, Trends, Challenges and Opportunities in Resource Efficiency and Policy Perspectives, E/ESCAP/MSED 7/2. During this session, the senior officials may wish to review the trends in environment and development in recent years, identify emerging challenges and opportunities, and discuss policy perspectives on achieving internationally agreed development goals in the region, including sustainable and efficient use of natural resources. The session will begin with a multi-stakeholder panel discussion around these themes. It is my pleasure to introduce, already seated in front of us, together with today's eminent panelists, Mr. Anthony Chu from the International Resource Panel, our moderator for this panel.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is very timely that we are here to listen to the perspective from the various stakeholders on the efficient use of our resources for Asia and Pacific, because the International Resource Panel just launched 2 important reports relevant to these issues. Along with the IPCC and the International Panel on Biodiversity, the International Resource Panel was created 10 years ago as a science policy interface, and we look into the natural resources as well as some impacts of the use of these resources on our ecosystem or life support systems. 2 recent publications out of more than 20 technical reports we launched referred to the resource efficiency, potential, and economic implications, and global material flows and resource productivity were released within the last 18 months. In this slide, it shows that the global trends in resource extraction shows the increase in global material use by 4 main material categories, including non-metallic minerals, metal ores, fossil fuels, and biomass. Since the global material use has grown faster than the population, we see in this figure that the per capita use has increased quite significantly. If we will focus to look at the Asia-Pacific region, which is the most significant one, as you can observe, it shows that we have the highest share of the 7 world regions in global domestic extraction of materials. Zooming into the Asia-Pacific use of materials, Asia-Pacific use scope is on the left-hand side, and the whole picture covers the entire global consumption. We observe 2 important messages. The first, that 56% population is using proportionally 53% of the global resources. However, we only made 25% value of it. So there is a great opportunity for a better value chain strategy for Asia Pacific. However, we expect and forecast such strategies will lead to much more human activities and more impact on ecosystem if they are not done in a sustainable way. Because the data also shows from 1990s to 2015, we consume or we need more resources to generate every dollar of GDP, showing that the material intensity grows and our efficiency of using resources is also getting lower and lower. I took a data 10 years ago, extracted from the Chinese Academy of Science, showing that for every dollar GDP generated, Chinese government needs 11.5 times of energy resources as compared to the index at time, which is Japan. The method we use, which is called economy-wide material flow accounting, also gives us a very good view on the emission side, which is the pollution, and it is also tackled in our session now, showing that Chinese SOx and NOx emission is 60 times as compared to Japan, which is 0.3 and 0.6 per dollar, 1,000 GDP. The next 4 slides, which I would just pass through, shows us what are the driving forces. We all know the impact equation with population, with the consumption pattern or production pattern as well, and technology have driving force differently. Over the last 40 years, we saw that all these factors are contributing to a greater use of material, with consumption pattern and production pattern the most significant and the most unsustainable. Therefore, in 2015, we have a UNIDO meeting, invited all the ASEAN countries, and I have 8 data here showing that most of the economies have already drafted a policy, program, action plan, or even ownership in terms of assigning at government units. The last slide. I would like, oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So these are the driving forces. Okay, the last slide. And this will be very important because we are inviting the stakeholders in this room, and they will be covering almost all, if not more, than the factors here. I would like to bring you to revisit the Marrakesh process, which was the basis of SCP, and which is also the basis very much tackled by the SCP as well as the resource use in the SDG. We need 4 important forces. On top is the enabling policy framework, the macro policy. We have heard this morning in the keynote 4 important macro policy options. On the bottom is the market forces, the public-private partnership. On the right, technological innovation. And on the left, how about individual and collective values and lifestyle? So without further ado, I would like to start our panel discussion. The first panelist is an old friend of mine. He just took up a new assignment in the Japanese embassy here in Bangkok, and he's the official alternate permanent representative of Japan to ESCAP, Mr. Yoshinori Suga. He's the first secretary. At the same time, my work with him was with the International Resource Panel, wherein I served in the technical panel, and Mr. Suga served in the steering committee. So I have been working and visited him in MOEJ in Japan, and we have discussed various issues on macro policy. And I would like to invite Suga-san to talk about the measures and regulatory and financing framework taken by Japan, as well as your involvement in the Asia-Pacific region on how to establish a sustainable production system and to improve efficient use of resources. Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And it's a great honor to join this interesting panel discussion. And I had several experiences to work on recycling the waste management and resource efficiency issues at the international level, like G7, G20, UNEP, IRP, and OECD. So I'm very happy to share my experience and the knowledge with you here. And firstly, I would like to highlight several challenges and opportunities. One thing is, I think this is already discussed in the previous session in a side event in this launch. But I think resource efficiency is closely linked with climate change issues. And now we have Paris Agreement, and we need to take an action towards Paris Agreement. And the 2020, 2030 timescale, perhaps that climate change issue is a very, very urgent issue, and we will change to some extent our society and system of the society. And it's closely linked to resource efficiency issues. For example, in production and consumption patterns, we produce GHG emissions. And for example, if we recycle aluminum, then we will save 97% of energy. And we also organized the G7 Alliance workshop in Tokyo last December. And we discussed about this relationship between resource efficiency and climate change. And we summarized several points. And for example, one is we need to set interlinked targets and indicators. We need to evaluate the impacts of measures and interlinked accounting. And we need to take measures for reinforcing synergies, for example. These are very important for us, especially I think in this region, because the Asia is the center of consumption and production in the world. And if we assume the rapid economic growth in Asia and the Pacific, then we need more actions. And there are 5 types of resource efficiency enhancing measures. One is demand reduction. The second is weight saving, substitution, lifetime extension, and recycling. These can make benefits and synergy with resource efficiency. Another thing is, I think, waste. When we talk about resource efficiency, sometimes we forget the waste issues. But waste is really, very big problem in Asia and the Pacific region. And the amount of waste generation will be doubled by 2050. And many big cities do not have enough capacity of landfilling. And the waste discharged into the environment or sometimes go into the river and then go to the ocean, then become marine litters. That's another big problem. So we have challenges and opportunities. And then I really touch about the Japanese experiences. We have been intensively promoting 3 R's, reduce, recycle, reuse, and recycle. We're promoting 3 R's domestically as well as globally. And in our system in Japan, we set the 3 R principles in our legal system in 2000. It's 70 years ago. And the first priority is, of course, reduce, prevent waste generation. And then the second priority is reuse, then recycle, and after that, energy recovery. Then finally, if we cannot recycle the waste, then we have to manage in a sound way. And we have a basic plan as a framework, and we set a target and review the progress of the plan every 5 years. And then we have achieved a 52% increase in resource productivity, and then 74% decrease of landfill amount. And we're also promoting a waste to energy by providing subsidizing. And one very new project is very interesting. And we have started Olympic medal project. We need to make 5,000 medals, gold, silver, and bronze. And we will use recycled material to make medals. So we use, for example, this tablet and the mobile phone. Actually, my phone is not a smartphone, but we can use these products to make medals. And we need support from citizens, business, and local governments. So we have started to implement this project. And finally, I talk about international cooperation. Japanese government is co-organizing the 3R Regional Forum in Asia and the Pacific. That's very, very important forum, I think, in this region. And that event is co-organized with UNCRD, UN Center for Regional Development. And this year, the 8th Regional Forum will be held in Hyderabad, this December. The topic and the theme of that forum is achieving clean water, clean land, and clean air through air and resource efficiency. So it's quite related to the topic we are discussing today. Okay, that's what I want to say.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think it's very good that you touch on indicator and data and a holistic view to mainstream these issues. Our next panel is a Director of Research and Development Division of the R&D Department of the Metropolitan Electricity Authority of Thailand. His experience in renewable energy, new technologies for developed MEA's distribution system, especially in solar cell, LED street lighting, and electric vehicle and chargers, is very essential to the discussion, especially on the technology side. So our second panel is Mr. Jumpot Himacharyan. I would like to invite you to discuss the steps that can support the adoption of technological innovation for resource efficiency, especially through experience.
Thank you, Philip. May I introduce a little bit my company. MEA is a Metropolitan Electricity Authority. Our business is electricity utility for the distribution electricity in 3 provinces such as Bangkok, Nonthaburi, and Samut Prakan. The coverage area 3,192 kilometers. My policy, MEA policy for the social and environmental responsibility policy with the mission in the social and environmental development to develop the organization to be economically, socially, and environmentally developed with the sustainability. MEA is the first organization to introduce, to use EV in our organization and establish the quick charger, the first quick charger in Thailand. We have opened this charger in the 1st August 2012, 5 years ago. Why we concern this? Because we concern for the environment and focus in the technology. Why we focus in EV? Because MEA have the duty for the distribute electricity in our area, in the service area. We prepare infrastructure for this technology, and we study for the EV technology, and we study for the charger to study in performance and technology for evaluate the performance, the charger and EV. And now, this we according for the energy blueprint Thailand 4.0, we focus on our target to reduce energy in the transportation sector 30%, reduce for 30%, and to reduce demand 1,123 KTOE, and we for the government sector, now have the plan to have the EV in our country, 1 million EV in the next 19 years. There. And after we construct and use the EV, now in Bangkok you some see the charger station in our service area in Bangkok, and we hope EV and this technology for our company and in the Bangkok is for the less pollution. This is my point.
Thank you very much. Actually, the efficient use performance data are all complete in the PowerPoint prepared. We have invited you to run the PowerPoint in the exhibit area, which is in the lobby of your electric vehicle. So the delegates will be able to see more details. Thank you very much. While I'm introducing our next speaker, I would like to invite him to come to the podium and set up with your PowerPoint, which has already been put in the computer. Our next speaker is Mr. Akash Vavsar. He is a ESCAP Business Advisory Council member, and he is the managing director of the SkyQuest Technology Group. It's a global intellectual asset and technology-focused research accelerator and investment bank supporting innovation ecosystems worldwide, providing access to technologies, markets, and finance. He has been part of 32 licensing deals and has been involved in fundraising of more or less $100 million US. So I would like to invite you to share with us what can be the role of the private sector, especially to facilitate the transition toward a resource-efficient Asia-Pacific through sustainable production practices and probably other commercial interests of the private sector.
Namaste and Sawadee Kha. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. I'm going to address the question and the relevance based on the experience of working in several innovation ecosystems and the essential challenges which, as part of achieving the SDGs or what roles startups and corporate sector essentially can play. So this is, it's a very crowded slide, but I'm going to go focus on very key parts. You see, we have to acknowledge the role of innovators and young entrepreneurs essentially in abilities to solve problems which we face. Of course, not everything is going to be solved through the policy frameworks. They enable it, but it's actually through the startups and the private sector which actually lead forward and actually take on the challenges and solve some of these issues. So what I've done is basically amalgamated few ideas which are prevailing and which are sort of, let's say, best practices or at least recommendations, which based, and it's extremely relevant here because of the August audience here, which some of them could be taken up further. So one I submit is that the corporates or even startups, so the large companies can actually start by voluntary, climate footprint monitoring, which could be the wastewater, water and energy audits. So for next 3 to 5 years, they could actually maintain internal records of what is the consumption happening, how they're using it. Additionally, innovators or techies essentially can work on these anonymized data sets to actually come up with on the open data frameworks, can come up with solutions on how to bring in more resource efficiency. The voluntary reportings of this footprint monitoring can actually then be converted into an incentive mechanism. I'll be happy to discuss more offline. The other aspect of natural resource management, There are several startups today out there which are actually using data either produced from the government or multilateral sources, as well as which are then using new technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually churn out valuable insights and actionable inputs. The other aspect is with respect to the technology development and transfer, which is often spoken about, especially under ESCAP. I think there's also an Asia-Pacific Center for Technology Transfer. But I think the role of transfer of technology is more pronounced in achieving resource efficiency with respect to looking at, you see, savvy corporates and private sector is actually very acutely aware of what are the challenges which they face with respect to resource efficiency and the SDG commitments. So in fact, they could actually liaise with the academia and come up with solutions, or actually which could then be broadly deployed. In terms of other disruptive ways, there are, of course, there's climate change, there's a climate fund which has been formed, there are various initiatives at the global level, but one of the biggest challenges with new technology initiatives which come in is the piloting aspect. So there would be, from the private sector's perspective, it would be great if policymakers could come together and put together a procurement framework for green technologies, which means that if, let's say, a corporate or a company is actually investing into technologies which will help in better resource efficiency, they should be given additional incentives, or they should be given certain special procurement status in the government procurement system on the relevant, especially when we talk about the food, water, energy nexus, they're extremely linked with the political and the government involvement. With respect to how, also it's very important to engage almost 1.8 billion youth, which is out there with respect to their sensitivity and understanding of the SDGs, and that's where again startups who work on open data frameworks. So very recently, Government of India has established an open data hack. So they're actually bringing in all the ministries to submit all the data to a common repository where startups can, or even technologists or entrepreneurs, innovators, academicians, can come and actually come up with better solutions based on that. So that can actually also bring both awareness and then the adoption for good practices. Last but not the least, in case of, as part of the climate change issue, I would like to leave with a thought that one of the biggest challenges we all face is the water crisis issue, and we should really harness technology, and the private sector should be brought in mainstream with new technologies of how we can solve, our challenges. So that's where I would like to submit with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akash. Materials are very informative. I hope we would be able to upload it to our website. So many of the items there includes climate change SDG goals are having connected to the various technology transfer projects. The next panel will tackle on gender issue. Professor Resurrection is a senior research fellow of the Stockholm Environment Institute Asian Center, and she's a gender specialist. Bernadette, as I call her, has led sponsored projects on climate adaptation, gender and water stresses in peri-urban Southeast Asia at the International Development Research Center project, mobility and disasters into the Philippine coastal areas, the Research Council of Norway funded, and the Mekong Research Fellowships programs on water governance. We would be very interested to know what would be the role of this specific stakeholder group in the resource-efficient Asia-Pacific from the policy perspective point of view. Bernadette.
Hello. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's a pleasure. I'm quite delighted to be here today as part of this panel. Very important topic indeed. In response to your question, I would like to first invoke certain overarching principles. First and foremost is that resource management, and for that matter, the attention towards resource efficiency or using and managing resources more efficiently is fundamentally a human activity. And studies have actually shown that more equitable and inclusive practices can indeed translate into more sustainable ways of using and managing resources. In fact, Joseph Stiglitz, for his part, has actually once said that inequality threatens economic sustainability, fueling unrest and conflict, and undermining the stability, level playing field, and consumer demand on which economic growth actually relies. So, having said that, let me present a few areas where a gender equality and social equity approach might critically engage with efforts to achieve resource efficiency. The first area I'd like to put forward is at the macro level, looking, for instance, at policy domains. And here, the challenge, I believe, is to break policy silos. We don't need to look far. We can indeed draw from what is already there. First and foremost, consciousness and integration of gender equality goals such as SDG 5 with resource efficiency goals in national development agendas. The social sector has been often sidestepped or set apart from environmental goals. This has been the traditional practice. The SDGs, however, pave the way forward in a way that could alter this practice. Specifically, I would like to draw attention that specifically within SDG 5, there is a target, an explicit target, and I quote, "Undertake reforms to give women equal rights to economic resources, as well as access to ownership and control over land and other forms of property, financial services, inheritance, and natural resources." Also, in the formation of institutional mechanisms, let's say across ministries or across line agencies concerned with tackling resource efficiency, all these efforts to form such mechanisms and institutions would benefit from being much more inclusive. For instance, including national women's affairs ministries and commissions and social welfare agencies. As far as I know, in every country now in Asia, there are ministries of women's affairs that we can draw upon. Also, we should redefine or reframe environmental and resource management beyond their technical fixes or technical ecosystem fixes and solely market-focused goals, but instead co-evolve a genuine social system of care for resources. The second area where we could actually apply a gender equality and social equity approach is in the macroeconomic policy framework. Usually this framework works to create incentive structures within economies. I will specifically draw from the example of the removal, the current effort to actually lift and remove fossil fuel subsidies. Now, this removal of subsidies can relate to lighting and cooking fuels that can actually negatively affect women's lives and women's work. As a result, governments should develop more information about the gender-specific impacts of such reforms or the removal of such subsidies. And in the meantime, possibly adopt a proceed with caution or a precautionary principle, ensuring that removals of such subsidies of fossil fuels are designed to safeguard women's access to clean household energy resources. With respect, for instance, as well to renewable energy sources, I think the time is ripe to actually consider gender issues or demand-side issues when considering incentive mechanisms for advancing renewable energy technologies. Finally, I will go into financing, and this is often referred to as resource efficiency or friendly financing. A plethora of lip service on gender equality is being made today, especially with availability of green funds or green climate funds. The few emerging research projects on this subject tell us that indeed it remains to be lip service. Not only is there vagueness on how gender equality might be attended to in climate change financing, but women, especially poor rural women, are being instrumentally seen as a reserve army of labor for environmental care and conservation without considering the unequal conditions under which they live. This goes against the very grain of harmonizing the goals of environmental sustainability, equality, and environment. At SEI, my organization, we recently studied energy transitions and gender. One of our findings is that a good number of women are increasingly active in renewable energy value chains. Improved cook stoves, for example, in Cambodia, solar power in Thailand and Vietnam, and in hydropower firms in Myanmar. Investors are gradually being sensitive to gender as a business case or as a consideration for their investments. It is encouraging that there is growing consciousness for gender equality in this sector. Our findings, however, showed that women in the renewable energy enterprises continue to deal with gender-related constraints and biases, especially in the access to capital needed to enlarge their enterprises. Their experiences also warn us that empowerment is not only economic, but multidimensional, and that it is about giving the opportunity and the chance for half the population to participate in defining a resource-efficient community and society.
Thank you very much, Professor Resurrection, for leading us to the very core of a family perspective as well, because in Japan, when we first deal with the pollution issues back in the 1960s, I understood the mothers played the most important role, then the medical doctors, and finally the technologists. Our next speaker, our next panel, under his leadership, Mayor Mongat of Naga City, the city ranked #1 overall, most competitive component city in the Philippines by the Competitiveness Council of the Philippines. This making a history of a clean sweep of all the 3 areas. #1 in economic dynamism, #1 in government efficiency, and #1 in infrastructure. Well, we would lovely want to listen to this great leader who has a great motto saying, leadership is action, not position. Your Honorable Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Chu, and my co-panelists. Good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I'd like to thank you for Mr. Stefanos for inviting me to be part of this panel, ESCAP. So the question I'm asked to answer is, what is the role of cities and local authorities in the transition towards resource-efficient production and consumption patterns? The question is very complicated. Well, when we talk of resource, we talk of when we talk of resources, of course, we talk about how we can sustain the access to and availability of resources for use by us, by human beings. And Professor Bernadette is correct in saying that all of us are gathered here today because all of us are interested on how we can conserve and preserve the world and Mother Earth. And when we talk of resource management, we talk of sustainable cities, sustainable development of localities and countries and of the world. So we came up with MDGs and the Sustainable Development Goals, which are being implemented at the national level and of course, downloaded to the local level in the cities, for example, around the Philippines. We have the seal, the so-called seal of good local governance, wherein we are required to comply with certain laws, national laws, for example, on environmental protection, like solid waste management, water protection, air, compliance with the anti-pollution national laws. So the question now is what is the more important, to empower the national government or the local governments for us to be able to better achieve resource-efficient production and consumption patterns. So what is exactly true for all of us in the world economy is the law of supply and demand. When there is a lot of supply, the supply of the resources is accessible to all of us at a lower cost. When the supply is low, then and the demand is high, and of course, it becomes not very accessible because it becomes more expensive. So how can we actually balance the availability and accessibility to resources and the demand? So it's a very complex thing that the world and countries and local governments have to address all at the same time. For instance, when the United Nations adopted MDGs and the SDGs, our common development goals, the global community, their eventual translation into programs, projects, and activities that sought to cut poverty by half and eliminate it altogether, ensure universal access to education, regardless of gender, and so on and so forth, were taking place in cities like ours, in Naga. So we are slowly trying to learn how to do more with less. Because as the population of the world grows, the population of cities and localities grow, and there's no corresponding growth in resources that will be consumed by the cities, by the population, then there comes the problem on how the national governments and local governments can address this imbalance. The same is going to be true with the goal of resource-efficient production and consumption patterns, which is a primary advocacy of urban nexus. Naga is fortunate to be part of the Urban Nexus program of GIZ that has identified three important needs that will sustain development of populations and cities. The first one is food, the second one is energy, and the third one is water. So if all cities and local governments will focus on conserving and preserving resources to be able to make food, energy, and water available and accessible to all, then perhaps that will be the key to a sustainable development of all cities around the world and the entire world necessarily. So when we advocate closing the loop and promoting optimal reuse of our resources, the when, the what, the hows, and the whys will be decided at your level in the international community, ESCAP, and other international organizations. But the where is us, where we in the local governments are located, because we can better manage our people, we can better manage our resources within our own territorial jurisdictions. So, for example, there are many simple ways on how we can conserve. Like, for example, we are promoting in our city for laundry shops to also own car washes. The water from the laundry can be used to wash cars, and all of these shops are also being requested to donate their water to the market, so to be used to clean up the market, especially the wet portions of the market, the meat and the fish sections, on a nightly basis. So all of these little things, if actually added up altogether and all cities will be doing simple initiatives to be able to work out simple solutions to simple problems, perhaps we can all seriously talk about really sustainable development.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mayor. Our next panelist is an indigenous leader and environmental activist with the Island Sustainability Alliance in the Cook Islands. She works on issues such as safer management of chemical contaminants as well as water supplies protection. So we would like to hear from you with regards to mobilizing community action. How can grassroots organizations make a difference in terms of bringing real change in the way resources can be used efficiently at home, in neighborhood, and nationally? I should pronounce your name correctly, Imogen Ingram. Am I right?
Yes, pretty good.
Imogen.
So I'm Imogen Ingram from the Cook Islands, one of the small island developing states in the Pacific. Completely different from the Asian context. We rely primarily upon tourism and other products from the ocean for our revenues. So we don't do manufacturing as such. And so in 2000, I want to go to two interlinked but slightly different policy achievements in the Cook Islands. In 2012, our Prime Minister announced that we were going to set up this really big marine protected area of about 1 million kilometers. And he set up this panel or committee of indigenous traditional leaders, government, and pretty well, I think, a few science people. And the first thing that we thought of as a traditional leaders group, we looked at the map of the islands, and roughly there's 6 islands in the northern archipelago and 6 islands in the southern archipelago, and the map showed only the southern islands. And we thought, well, that's odd, because most of the fish around the northern group islands are around the equator. So our members of our traditional leaders group reached out to the other traditional leaders in the northern group when they came to the capital island for this annual celebrations. And they said, well, no, we want to be included in this, in the planning for this. We want to be included in this big marine protected area. So how we gain support? In our traditional way, we put aside areas of the lagoon to rest at the area so that the fish stocks and other seafood have chance to rebuild. And so we explained to people this is the same idea, but on a bigger scale. So basically the idea, yes, we agree in principle, but we have to include the northern group. The more we talked about it, then they said, no, actually we want a 50 nautical mile exclusive zone around each island. Now this became a sticking point with the government negotiators because our Ministry of Marine Resources said, no, that will seriously damage the fishing revenues that we earn by selling licenses to foreign fishing boats to operate in our waters. So finally, what cleared the blockage was we got a report from the Secretariat of the Community for the Pacific about fishing that showed that almost all fish that was caught commercially was caught outside the 15 nautical mile zone. And then to clinch it, the Island Council and traditional leaders of 2 of the most effective northern group wrote to the Prime Minister and said, we want to protect our exclusive zone and we want to protect our future because we don't want to get fished out. In the northern group, there are very few places you can buy food other than what you catch yourself. So they were very firm about that. And in the end, it was resolved well. This year, they passed the act that established this big marine protected area, which we call Marae Moana. And within this marine protected area, only licensed activities will be permitted. So they created a policy document, and that leads me to the next issue, where we have plans for overseas companies want to come and do deep seabed mineral mining. So when I first heard about this in 2009, I wondered, why would people come from so far away, like the United States, to work 1.5 kilometers below the surface of the water in order to extract these polymetallic nodules, which nature has seen fit to just put in our northern groups islands. And so somebody explained to me that what happens is these regulations on land for mining have become so strict that they're looking for ways to avoid the financial and a burden of properly dealing with the mining wastes. So he said what they'll do is the mother company will come, set up a small shelf company in your jurisdiction. They will carry out these activities below the surface of the water, and then after 5 years they will go away, and you'll say, wait a minute, come back, remediate this environmental problem you've caused. And he said, no, they'll just say, so sue me, you know, because your jurisdiction, we've only got a company worth $1,000 there. So I thought, this is good advice. So we took care, we spoke with our government and said, look, I think we ought to have a moratorium on deep seabed mining. Nevertheless, a deep seabed mining commission was set up, and the talk goes on. We had examples of how they were going to mine it. There was this remote control vehicle, like a giant vacuum cleaner, goes along the ocean floor, and you could see this plume of contaminants rising from either side of it. And typically what those contaminants are is heavy metals and other toxic chemicals that have settled on the ocean floor and should probably stay there. So we commented upon that. And the next time this company showed that film, they'd cut the footage which showed the plume. Interesting, we thought. I think Papua New Guinea is the only one that has given an exploratory license for this deep sea mining. Protests from the communities there have been very strong, so that has been delayed. And we just ask, we keep invoking the precautionary principle to our government and say, let's just wait and see how this works, because this contaminant plume, first of all, most likely will affect the fishing from which we already earn significant revenues. And then the other thing is liability for what happens if like a neighbouring country decides to do this deep sea mining and you get this plume or contamination moving out of the jurisdiction of the company, out of the country that's doing the mining, into the jurisdiction of the next country next door, which doesn't want to do it. So then, with the uncertainty of how the ocean currents work and what we regard as a very experimental technology, we think that we should not do it. It's much easier and more controllable to mine these minerals on land, rather than take advantage of small islands with lack of knowledge and lack of economic or political clout.
Yeah, I think that is a very good experience, especially from an island point of view.
Yeah.
However, because due to the time constraint, probably I can invite you to wrap up, and so we can pass it to the next session.
So if you ask me how NGOs can affect change, I think that we act to translate in both directions, from the UN level down to local, to explain what it means in our context, and also to take the message from the local level up to our politicians and higher to and to get the dialogue going. So luckily, they actually did listen to the objections of the community, and I think that would make their policies much easier to be implemented.
I agree with you totally. Thank you so much. Let's give a good big hand to our panelists who have been contributing excellent ideas to our session. And with that, I also would like to turn over the floor back to Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
May I kindly ask the panelists to return to their country seats? And I kindly ask the audience for your patience to remain seated while the panelists make their way off the stage. Thank you.
Now, thank you, Professor Chu and the panelists. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to invite the distinguished delegates to intervene on Agenda Item 3, Policy Perspectives Towards a Resource-Efficient Asia-Pacific Region. I will first open the floor to statements from member and associate member governments. Once all country statements have been made, I will invite statements from intergovernmental bodies, after which I will open the floor to the representatives of UN bodies and specialized agencies, and finally to designated representatives of civil society, major groups, and other stakeholders. To begin, I would now like to open the floor for statements and views from governments. And I recognize the distinguished delegate from the Russian Federation.
Dear Ms. Chairperson, the Russian approach towards an environmentally clean, resource-efficient development is based on the provisions of the key normative and program documents which have been adopted by the Russian Federation, the long-term socioeconomic concept for the development of Russia up to 2020. The climate and the environmental doctrines of the Russian Federation. And within this context, we should pay specific attention to the modernization and restructuring of the economy on the basis of the support of the innovative development and knowledge-based economy, shaping an environmental atmosphere in the country which contributes to the development of the human potential, reinforcing state control and monitoring of the quality of the environment. Namely, first and foremost, of the clean air and the drinking water quality. We share the understanding which was reached at the conclusion of the UN Sustainable Development Conference Rio+20, the understanding that the green economy may exercise the functions of one of the strategies of the integrations of the principles of sustainable development in genuine economic programs. Alongside with that, each state is entitled to choose the optimum modernization model, as well as the mechanisms and means of achieving environmentally clean development, depending on its national abilities and possibilities. Duplication of the principles of sustainable development and the transformation of the green economy into an alternative concept of sustainable development is counterproductive. Implementation of the green economy ideas should not lead to putting up new barriers, new discriminatory barriers in international trade and the creation of so-called green jobs under the pretext of ecologization of the economy. We assume that all of the cluster of issues pertaining to resource efficiency requires appropriate data and information statistical accompaniment in order to obtain unbiased objective data and monitoring the status quo in this area of the APR cooperation. We do agree with the fact that in order for us to improve the quality of work in the APR, the resource efficiency area, namely, it is imperative to promote closer interaction between developed and developing countries. Such close interaction should harmonize two factors, namely, macroeconomic level and sectoral dimension. Alongside, we have to tackle the task of building up scientific cooperation, building up the human capacity, and also putting together favorable framework for the transfer of technology. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, distinguished delegates from the Russian Federation. Now I invite the distinguished delegate from Thailand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The concept of resource efficiencies has been introduced to the Asia-Pacific region over the period of time. Any improvement in resource efficiencies in the region will have significant global impact, as the region is a major consumer of global resources. Improving resource efficiencies facilitate a transition to sustainable consumption and production, which requires actions by both public and private sectors. In Thailand, resource efficiencies has been integrated to various national sectoral policy framework, the 20 years national strategies, the 12th National Economic and Social Development Plan, and the Environmental Quality Management Plan. All focuses on enhancing efficiencies and sustainable utilization of natural resources. Another important national plan is the SCP, Sustainable Production and Consumption Roadmap, aiming to change the unsustainable consumption and production of Thai society by applying resource efficiency approach within the next 20 years. The roadmaps also harmonize SCP strategies, plans, and projects of various government agencies and guides their implementation. Thailand has taken many action to shift towards SCP. For example, public awareness campaigns has been implemented to change the mindset of consumer towards making more environmentally friendly and sustainable choices. The government has been planning for public transportation systems to shift towards low energy and energy efficient systems, such as rail, water, multimodal transport. To promote public awareness on green products, the government promotes evaluation and accreditation for environmentally friendly goods and services, such as green label, green offices, green hotels, and other environmentally friendly labels. Regarding industrial sector, Thailand has been promoting the green industry policies, aiming at reduction of impact on the environment and local community, and improvement of resources and energy efficiencies. Green public procurement project has been promoting among the national and local government agencies and state enterprises. The project is now being expanded to include green procurement in the private sector. Thailand strongly promotes capacity building scientific knowledge and technology, particularly on the measurement and monitoring of domestic material consumption and material footprints through a number of workshops supported by the UN Environment and the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization. Increasing capacity of Thai agency will help Thailand in making progress in resource efficiency and moving the country towards an inclusive green economy. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that our active implementation at national level expresses our spirit of shared responsibility to address global environmental problems. Thailand would like to suggest that ESCAP, in cooperation with UN agency and research institutions, provide support to member states on implementing measures, good practices, developing statistical data and monitoring and evaluation on material footprints and domestic material consumption. These supports could help national implementation to chip towards resource efficiencies in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Thailand. I now invite the distinguished delegate from Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I also would like to thank the panels for the interesting discussion. The recent global crisis taught every of us to pursue our development differently. It is no longer a time to put efforts in gaining economic growth away from achieving environmental goals, as it is evidence that water pollution, land degradation, and other types of pollution and degradation are not solely environmental issues. It is an economic and development challenges. If left unabated, environmental pollution and degradation does not only have the potential of unwinding years of development, but also it has the potential to dramatically affect the future of humankind. To deal with these circumstances, we need significant shift of our today ways in consuming our natural resources. That is why this meeting is one and is timely and opportune. We have to shift our perspective to promote resource efficiency in Asia-Pacific from end-of-pipe perspective that focus on production phase of product into a new perspective. This perspective is ensuring intervention in all phases of product life cycle. Today, our biggest challenge from the new perspective is dealing with consumption phase and end-of-life treatment of product. We have acknowledged two challenging issues in this area, which are potential exposure of hazardous and toxic materials into humans' daily activities and inefficient of resources because our inabilities to close the loop of the product cycles and treat them as valuable resources and not process them as waste. Indonesia sees that behavior plays important aspect in achieving sustainable consumption and production. Besides our regulatory instrument, we consistently promote the development of voluntary instrument and informational instrument to drive environmental friendly behavior in the society, businesses, and government activities. These instruments are backed up by a national standard system to ensure their achievement. Some examples in this area are consumer information for business and society, standard service in public facilities, green infrastructure, information and education for society, and green public procurement for government expenditure. Furthermore, economic instruments are equally important, including internalization of the externalities, environmental fund, and as well as economic incentive. Among of Indonesia new intervention and initiative is the policy on economic instrument, which includes a government regulation decree in establishing economic instrument relevant to environment, forestry, and climate change issue, and also a new regulation of National Environmental Services Authority on sustainable financing that has issued in order to encourage financial institutions to also take important roles in moving towards resource efficient in Indonesia and provide particular schemes for international cooperation. My delegation encouraged Asia-Pacific member countries immediately to develop and implement policy intervention on managing impact on consumption phase and end-of-life treatment of product we use day to day. This policy intervention also needs to be supported with platform which every stakeholders can take action and mobilize their response together. In this occasion, let me urge every of us to have a common platform for mobilizing stakeholders to promote changing society behaviors and crossing environmental issues. We see our future policy instrument as an engine of social cohesiveness advancing to environmental friendly behavior toward resource efficiency, economic growth, and welfare in the people of this region. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Indonesia. I now invite the distinguished delegate from Iran.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Since this is the first time my delegation is taking the floor, I'd like to join all of those who congratulated you on your election as the chair of the senior officials meeting within the Ministerial Conference for Environment and Development. I'm just wish to share some of my thoughts and views whilst appreciating the panelists with a very informative and at times very in-depth examination of various dimensions of how societies in general and in particular in Asia and Pacific can turn into a very resource efficient mode of development. I think there are three key words that would require further elaboration. There are words such as responsibility that stems from the Rio principle of common but differentiated responsibilities with respective capabilities, and that certainly brings me back to the issue of when Her Excellency Madam Shemshad Akhtar earlier on this morning was highlighting the fact that in Asia and Pacific some 32% of the world's GDP is being produced, whilst well over 60% of natural resources are being consumed. That certainly means, as far as one would be scrutinizing the ratio, signifies the fact that Asia and Pacific is by all measures a major supplier of not only the raw materials but also the finished and semi-finished goods to the world. That really leaves a good scope for the responsibilities of not only the responsibility of the producers to take care of what they potentially leave behind once their products become obsolete. I'm very much targeting the e-waste that is becoming ever so popular these days. Wherever on earth you go, you just run into bundles of e-waste that require significant management. So the responsibility is not only with the producers, but also with those who have access or have developed the technology to better manage our environment, to better promote the issues of a more resource-efficient society within Asia and Pacific. So the second point, or the second key word, is strengthening. We all very much, at least from the west of Asia, where I come from, we very much appreciate the fact that the capabilities and the capacities are invariably limited in a number of developing countries, including Iran, and thus we need really to strengthen our activities. And a strengthening would have to be explored through the right means, and that's why forums and fora such as where we are right now would play a significantly important role as to how strengthening can really be materialized as far as the capacity is concerned. And the third word is the collective move for a paradigm shift to what we are already used to, what we are very much inclined to steer away from, and the practices that we are certainly in immense need to promote. This is very important that we share. I mean, lessons learned are said over a few decades that we'd have to really compile the best available or the best lessons learned, even the failures and the successes alike, so that we do not jeopardize the future that we want, as earlier on back in 2012, where all the heads of states and governments got together in Rio and highlighted the fact that we really want a new world that a good example of this global move in coherence was the balanced outcome of COP21 in Paris. The Paris Agreement is a real demonstration of what we all collectively look forward to. So these moves would have to be strengthened, and this strengthening comes from responsibility and the sharing of different practices and experiences and the urgency to follow, once devised, a paradigm shift to a more resource-efficient society. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, distinguished delegate from Iran. I now invite the distinguished delegate from India to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me also join other delegates to congratulate you on being elected to the chair. And also let me thank you and the panelists for giving us insights on the resource efficiency which we just have discussed. We all are aware that there has always been a close linkage to the control of extraction and use of natural resources. But over past few decades, demands for natural resources accelerated to the extent that it has become environmental problems such as climate change, loss of biodiversity, resource deficiency, ecosystem degradation, etc., and etc. In the morning, as rightly said my fellow delegates from Iran, we heard from the Executive Secretary, ESCAP, that resource efficiency in the region is a matter of concern, and we need to address that. And my fellow delegate just now explained in detail that how we need to, further deliberate and come to an action. So therefore, one of the key sustainability challenges for coming decades will be use of natural resources efficiently and mainstreaming the resource efficiency strategy, which is based on the life cycle approach. Targeting the reduced abiotic resource use in order to reduce current levels of anthropogenic environmental parameters. Therefore, a reduction of global materials use, or if not, at least stabilization at the present levels, demand major reduction in metabolic rates, especially Asia-Pacific region, which can be achieved by indulging resource efficiency, not only throughout the material life cycle. I think we need to have the environmental life cycle assessment as one of the key tools in order to see that right from the cradle to grave approach. Extraction, design, manufacturing, consumption, etc., etc. And more so, we need to address the post-consumption stage, wherein this region has been almost like sort of a dumping from the developed countries. So we need to address that system, how to address those issues for either we say resource recovery, waste recovery, in whatever term we need to say, that we need to address. As a sustainable future demands many initiatives, and one way to tackle these adverse impacts of resource crunch, environmental and economy is that Asia-Pacific region needs a transformation towards more resource-efficient practices and technologies coupled with the behavioral change. What is required? We have technologies somewhere else, we can take them at a cost, but what we need to have the behavioral pattern of the consumer, we all. So we need a behavioral change from the consumers for dealing with resource use and reuse of their waste streams. So resource efficiency can be a game changer, and particularly with the additional value of the behavioral pattern of the consumer. And that's why, in my opinion, why judicious use of resources, the key elements of sustainable development, which is also particularly reflected in the sustainable development goals, particularly 12, aiming to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns also in 8 other SDG goals, and also have a bearing on resource efficiency. Therefore, Madam Chair, there is a greater responsibility on all of us to take a judicious balance which is required among not only with the producers, but the consumers and as well as the disposal system. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from India. I now invite the distinguished delegate from Uzbekistan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to make my intervention in Russian. Уважаемые дамы и господа,
ladies and gentlemen, today for the first time we've heard the statements from various countries, And most of the countries are looking to development and have been able to adapt at national level. And that's very important because the development aims are being given to us by ESCAP, and we're following them closely. Everything we've heard means that we must give much attention to ensuring livings for the population, their well-being, environmental safety, and economic development. Of course, many of the countries who've participated here are concerned with the consumption of natural resources. And we're looking into the effectiveness of broader introduction of renewable sources. I'd like to point out that this has had an effect on the economy. And in this year we have increased by 10%, and last year 6.5%. And there are many tasks which we still need to address. We have to define certain areas to bring in innovative technology and to look into production, organization, transport technology, and we need to use renewable sources for heating, and particularly entrepreneurs need to participate in this. We need to provide new innovations for provision of power, for energy carriers, and to find the right technology. We think that by 2030 we will improve the economy by another 10% and introduce another 20% of renewable energy. At the same time, we've heard about questions connected with waste, and we think that's a very important subject. And we'd like to tell you that this year there's been a new decree to deal with wastes and their disposal, and we need to join our efforts together to be able to increase the productive process. And in this respect, we support the proposals made. We think it's very important to attract private partnerships for production. We need to ensure a clean environment, and we would like to draw your attention to issues connected transboundary issues. And here we are keen on using international instruments, conventions, which would ensure regulation among countries. We believe that using transboundary water resources is a matter for international law in the interests of all states. I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you that at this time we have a project in Central Asia to deal with transboundary water resources in the region, and we want to ensure the rational use of water resources. United Nations and its organizations, we think we've been following for some 10 years now what's been said, and we've been working on specific tasks, particularly to support measures being taken by the developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Uzbekistan. Are there any other governments who wish to speak before I open the floor to intergovernmental bodies? I see none. I will now open the floor to intergovernmental bodies. Are there any representatives of intergovernmental bodies who wish to speak before I open the floor to UN bodies and specialized agencies? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I now invite the rep from ECO to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm delighted to address this audience on behalf of the Secretariat of the Economic Cooperation Organization, ECO, and wish you fruitful deliberations. Over the last 3 decades, ECO has developed into a full-fledged regional intergovernmental organization with growing international profile. And ECO is now involved more than ever in creating sustainable environmental frameworks for cooperation. ECO member states have recently endorsed the ECO Vision 2025, which is the key strategic document streamlining our organization with the emerging regional and global trends through enhancing multi-vector cooperation within ECO and beyond. The vision, inspired by 3 principles of sustainability, regional integration, and conducive environment, has identified social welfare and environment among 6 priority areas for regional actions in the coming years. The transition to resource efficiency is of critical importance for ECO region. Gaps and overlaps between and among sectors, potential trade-offs, knowledge sharing between and within sectors, funding methodologies, specialized policy making and response systems, coherence and synergies in governance and planning are among issues before us in ECO. We would warmly welcome if the role of regional and sub-regional organizations and entities in tackling environmental challenges is duly reflected in the Ministerial Summit declaration to be adopted as the outcome of this event. The declaration may also envisage an agenda aimed at deepening and broadening of regional and sub-regional environment-related cooperation in Asia-Pacific, and a multi-sectoral integrated approach that incorporates all elements for enhancing regional cooperation. ECO stands ready to contribute to maximization of ESCAP impact and coherence through enhanced consultative process, networking, and capacity building in any formats. In this vein, ECO could be a regional platform for mobilizing relevant stakeholders across the region for developing programs on sustainable management of natural resources, including those facilitating the implementation of relevant aspects of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. ECO and ESCAP have the common interest in developing environmental initiatives, in particular combating desertification and land degradation, dust haze and sandstorm, conservation of biological diversity, green economy in the context of sustainable development, and promotion of environmental awareness can be among promising sectoral areas of cooperation. We pin hopes that this summit will pave the way to further strengthening and streamlining solutions and mechanisms for regional cooperation on sustainable development. This will eventually enable the relevant stakeholders to harmonize the implementation of environment-related outcomes and the 2030 Agenda and implementation of commitments under the Paris Agreement on climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the representative from ECO or ECHO. Are there any other representatives of intergovernmental bodies who wish to speak before I open the floor to UN bodies and specialized agencies? I see none. I will now open the floor to UN bodies and specialized agencies. I invite WHO to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. According to WHO study, the global burden of disease from environmental risk factors constitute 24% of global death. And unfortunately, in the Asian Pacific region, this is even more serious because of the rapid industrialization. So we consider the positive impacts of efficient and sustainable management of natural resources should include improved health and well-being of the populations in the region. We all know that air pollution causes cardiovascular and lung diseases and death, water pollution, waterborne diseases such as cholera and other diseases, typhoid fever and other diarrheal diseases, chemical hazards called poisoning, and we all know that how environmental contamination led to ecological and health disaster, like in Minamata city. Also, the emerging issue of climate variability and climate change aggravates all of these problems. Also, we should not forget that most of the environmental issues are transboundary. These environmental factors don't respect national borders, as was mentioned by panelists and other previous speakers. That's why WHO has been working with the UN Environment as a secretariat of the Asia Pacific Regional Forum on Health and Environment, advocating for environment health at the national and regional levels. Also, WHO is supporting small island developing states and least developed countries to cope with the impact of climate change. And we consider Paris Agreement is also one of the most important public health agreements of the 21st century. It should be noted that those vulnerable countries, such as small island developing states, or least developed countries, or underdeveloped countries, did not contribute to the cause of these global climate changes. Rather, they are victims. So we, UN agencies, have a special responsibility to provide technical and financial support for them. So WHO will work with UN Environment and UN ESCAP to maximize the health co-benefits of the efficient and sustainable management of natural resources. And these aspects of health co-benefit of energy resource efficient and sustainable development should be mentioned in the outcome document of this important environmental summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative of WHO. Are there any other UN bodies and specialized agencies who wish to speak? I see none. I will now open the floor to major groups and other stakeholders in the order provided by the Secretariat. I would like to remind delegates to please limit your statements to just 3 minutes. I now give the floor to the representative of the Federation of Free Workers, International Trade Union Confederation.
Thank you, Chair. Let me share the workers' perspective. Ambitious environmental climate action can act as a driver of decent work creation in developing, emerging, and advanced economies. The challenge is to ensure that painful adjustments in labor markets and potential displacement of employment is addressed. A strong coordination of climate, economic, and social policies is indispensable. Thus, the need for a just transition. Using a just transition framework means that the burden of change that benefits everyone will not be placed disproportionately on a few. A just transition for all implies that responses to climate change and environmental sustainability should maximize opportunities for decent work creation and ensure social justice, rights, and social protection for all, leaving no one behind. Governments need to open up the space for greater participation of social partners in the implementation of specific measures to realize UN resolutions. A capable workforce with adapted skills is necessary for the efficient use of resources and to transform energy systems, buildings, industry, transportation, and agriculture, ensuring the realization of fundamental principles and rights at work. Transition to green growth is a driver of structural economic change. Structural transformation is likely to affect jobs that are available and jobs that are needed. Decent jobs are at the heart of policies to address climate change, heal the earth, and use resources more efficiently, not just as co-beneficiaries, but more importantly, as enablers of climate and environment action. Transition policies are needed to realize net employment gains and ensure social justice under both adaptation and mitigation measures. If well managed, climate action can be a pathway for reduced inequality and greater social inclusion. Policy coherence is also essential at social, economic, and climate policies, and government agencies dealing with them should work in harmony. Climate action offers opportunities for decent work and social inclusion through new enterprises, green products and services, greener workplaces, climate-resilient infrastructure, and job creation, particularly green jobs. Green jobs are decent jobs in any economic sector that improve energy and raw materials efficiency, limit greenhouse emissions, minimize waste pollution, protect and restore ecosystems, and support adaptation to effects of climate change. Greening of jobs help reduce environmental impact, ultimately to levels that are sustainable. Green jobs respect rights at work, give equal opportunity for work, provide living wage, social protection, occupational safety and health, and use of social dialogue effectively. We ask governments to enhance state and corporate accountability and compliance with environmental regulations, including granting appropriate inspection powers to authorities. Principles such as polluter pays, intergenerational equity, accountability, and decent work go together. Corporations responsible for harming the health of their workers and the community through their production processes should be made accountable for their action and inaction. Increased opportunities for engagement with workers and grassroots communities, including mechanisms for social dialogue throughout policy and decision-making processes at all levels. Established compensation, employment, skills development, and social protection measures for workers in sectors and their respective supply chains that will be affected by a shift to environment-friendly industries and practices, and create an enabling environment for sustainable and greener enterprises that creates jobs.
I remind you on time, please.
That would be all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Representative of the Federation of Free Workers, International Trade Union Confederation. I now wish to invite the representative from Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact to take the floor. Reminding you, please, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Here I am speaking on behalf of Indigenous Peoples Major Group. First of all, I would like to congratulate to you all, the newly elected Bureau. Madam Chair, policy that regulates to the resources and its effective and its efficient and effective mobilization, and as well as its best utilization, as well policy determines on how to manage the natural resources in a sustainable way. The Paris Agreements on Climate Change and United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People on RIP and Convention on the Biodiversity, CBD, are in place that promotes to the sustainable management of natural resources through indigenous knowledge perspective. The indigenous peoples have their own customary laws and traditional practices concerning to sustainable natural resources management that has been recognized by by those international human rights instruments. The tools and technologies used by indigenous peoples for sustainable management of natural resources enhance to the environmental protection and conservation. Madam Chair, there are many challenges threats to the actors who are actively working for the sustainable natural resource management. The state policies have not recognized the contribution of the indigenous peoples in sustainable resource management. Instead, they are blamed of destroying the natural resources. The policy gaps in institutional gap. The policy gap is an institutional gap that does not limit to the plans and programs, but also limit to the implementation. Means keep away from access to manage the natural resources in an efficient and sufficient way. Because of that, the environmental hazards cannot be mitigated and measures cannot be taken. And resource efficiency is at another challenge. Developing countries in the region on an average need 5 kg of material to produce 1 unit of GDP, while industrialized countries need 1/5 of this. According to ESCAP, bearing energy efficiency, which has registered impressive gains, resource efficiency in the region has been decreasing since 2000. The domestic material consumption and materials footprints per capita has been rising, and so is resource intensity. There is also very little evidence of significant decoupling between resource consumption and economic growth, except the energy sector. Madam Chair, in order to respect the sense and spirits of SDGs, policy perspective should prioritize legal recognition of customary land tenure of indigenous peoples through specific policies, actions, and measures guided by clear targets, indicators, and data disaggregation, including by ethnicity, to be monitored through participatory follow-up and review process at all levels. As well, ensure policy cohesion and balance implementation of the 3 dimensions of sustainable development based on respect, protection, realization of human rights. National implementation plans should uphold clear social and environmental safeguards.
A reminder of time, please.
Thank you, dear. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, representative of Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact. I now give the floor to the representative from the Environment and Social Development Organization.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of Environment and Social Development Organization, I would like to express my sincere thanks and support this ESCAP document. Madam Chair, our region, we have resource to tackle the SDG. But resource management is the biggest challenge, particularly for natural resources. We believe it is the high time to protect our forest, land, and water bodies. As this document describes that sustainable and efficient management of natural resources is a frequent and crucial aspect of the 2030 agenda and other global agendas. The present document provides an updated review of trends, challenges, and opportunities emerging from the use of natural resources in the region in recent years. Taking this as an explanation, we believe collective, national, and regional approach is the high demanding. A political commitment is an emerging need. Real and practical participation of the grassroots people, including indigenous and marginalized groups with multi-stakeholders needed. We strongly believe regional cooperation is the key, and coordination between government agencies, academia, CSOs will help to reduce information gaps, and this cooperation will foster more resource-efficient approach in Asia-Pacific region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the representative from the Environment and Social Development Organization. Thank you for all those interesting statements and remarks, and for an excellent session. We are running exactly 4 minutes behind schedule, so we will go straight into the next item. So, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are now moving to the consideration of Agenda Item 4, Draft Ministerial Declaration on Environment and Development for Asia and the Pacific. As per the annotated agenda document E/ESCAP/MSED7/3, Draft Ministerial Declaration on Environment and Development for Asia and the Pacific is indicated for this agenda item. Following the issuance of this document, 5 informal consultations of the Advisory Committee of Permanent Representatives of ESCAP have deliberated on the text with the view of advancing towards consensus. Based on these discussions, the document has been updated and issued as E/ESCAP/MSED7/WP1. Therefore, the document pertinent to this agenda item is E/ESCAP/MSED7/WP1, which I understand has been circulated to seats of government yesterday and has been distributed today to all delegations. This document is now before us for final consideration and recommendation for adoption at the ministerial segment. This session is structured as follows. First, I would ask the Secretariat to introduce the process and the document. Then we shall proceed with the consideration of the text of the declaration with a view to recommending it for adoption. Subsequently, the floor will be open for country and stakeholder statements. I now have the pleasure to invite our esteemed and learned Secretary, Mr. Stefanos Fotio, Director of the Environment and Development Division, to introduce the draft ministerial declaration. Mr. Fotio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, this session is tasked with considering the draft Ministerial Declaration on Environment and Development for Asia and the Pacific. To support this task, the Secretariat facilitated, in consultation and under the guidance of the Member States, the development of the draft Ministerial Declaration on Environment and Development, the item under discussion under Agenda Item 4 this afternoon. The document in front of you represents the agreement reached to date through the following process. A zero draft, together with a note on the process for developing the declaration, was presented to the Advisory Committee of Permanent Representatives and other representatives designated by members of the Commission, ACPR in short, on 30 June 2017, and sent to all seats of governments for comments. Subsequent iterations of the declaration were produced based on inputs received both from seats of governments and through informal consultations of the ACPR for a total of 6 consultations. During the last informal consultation of the ACPR, held on August 31st, members of the ACPR have reached tentative consensus on the draft ministerial declaration, and the document is now presented to you as E/ESCAP/MSED7/WP1, Draft Ministerial Declaration on Environment and Development for Asia and the Pacific. This document, as our Chair has said, was sent to all seats of governments yesterday, and a hard copy was also distributed to all delegates this morning. It is also available on the website under Official Documents, Agenda Item 4 of the conference. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, while the Secretariat facilitated the process, the document itself is an outcome of the work and direct inputs of Member States. We would like to take this opportunity to thank all Member States that have provided comments for their valuable inputs and active participation in the process. The draft Ministerial Declaration reaffirms the commitment of ESCAP members and associate members to relevant internationally agreed development agendas, and in this regard defines regional priorities for promoting the sustainable and efficient management of natural resources and the environment. We look forward to hearing your views and anticipate the adoption of the declaration on Friday at the ministerial segment of the summit, following your recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fotio. I understand from your presentation that the current text of the declaration is the product of direct recommendations and negotiations by the member states. I would like to thank the ESCAP member states for taking ownership of developing the declaration and reflecting in it their collective wisdom. I am confident that all the work that member states have already put into this document will greatly facilitate our discussions today. Distinguished colleagues, let us now begin our consideration of the draft declaration on environment and development for Asia and the Pacific as contained in E/ESCAP/MSED7/WP1. I propose to now take comments by groups of paragraphs, but before that, are there any general comments on the text at this time? As I see none, let us proceed. Are there any comments on paragraphs 1 to 7? 1 to 7.
Give the floor to
Indonesia? Oh, apologies, Indonesia, we didn't see your hand up. Indonesia, you have the floor now under general comments.
Thank you. Chairperson. First of all, let me thank the Secretariat for providing the document as well as explaining the process of producing the draft declaration. To paraphrase a popular saying, with abundant natural resources comes great responsibility. It is indeed a great responsibility for this region to ensure that such natural resources will continue to provide sources of living for future generations. If those resources are managed unsustainably, the resource can quickly evolve into a sinister course for the region. For Indonesia, ensuring a balanced environment and economic development agenda is a matter of national survival, and indeed, I believe it's also for this region. So at this occasion, let me share some general views on the draft declarations by emphasizing the following points. First, we share the concern that environmental degradation, including that one by the climate change, it's also threatened our livelihood. So it is important for this region to also build the resilience of the regions. Second, political leadership, affirmative action, and multi-layer partnership and collaborations, as well as mobilized resources, are among key components of the region platform in moving towards inclusive and sustainable economic development of the region. Third, environmental challenges is unique and time-specific. Thus, recognizing the national circumstances and priorities, as well as capacity and level of development, is essential of the draft declaration. And lastly, we hope that the draft declaration can focus on not what, but how to implement the agenda of this region in longer term and how to put the vision into action. I thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Indonesia. As we have no other comments under general, we will proceed. Are there any comments on paragraphs 1 to 7? As I see none, let us now proceed to paragraphs 8 to 11. As we have no comments on paragraphs 8 to 11, could we proceed to paragraphs 12 to 17? Are there any comments on paragraphs 12 to 17? As I see none, we will proceed now to paragraphs 18 to 20. We also see none. We will proceed now to paragraphs 21 and 22. I see none. As it appears that there are no outstanding issues to resolve in this draft document, Then do I take it that the senior officials can recommend the text for adoption by the ministers? It is so decided. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I will now open the floor for any statements under this agenda item. First, I will open the floor to statements from member and associate member governments. Once all country statements have been made, I will invite statements from intergovernmental bodies, after which I will open the floor to the representatives of UN bodies and specialized agencies, and finally to designated representatives of civil society, major groups, and other stakeholders. To begin with, I would now like to open the floor for statements and views from governments. I would also like to remind delegates of the time limit of 3 minutes, and I now invite the member from Thailand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I would like to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of the draft Ministerial Declaration of MSET-7. Thailand recognizes that MSET has served as a regional platform in addressing emerging environmental and development challenges for more than 3 decades. However, in recent years, a number of regional intergovernmental platforms have been initiated to address environmental issues and sustainable development. For example, Asia-Pacific Forum for Sustainable Development focuses on regional perspective on the implementation and follow-up of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development in the region. The UNEP Forum of Ministers and Environment Authorities of Asia-Pacific has also been set up as a regional platform to tackle environmental challenges in the region. Thailand strongly supports using the existing conference structure of ESCAP, namely the Committee on Environment and Development in convening the ministerial meeting in the future. Thank you. For the effectiveness and benefit to member countries.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Thailand. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate from Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I also would like to join Thailand in thanking the Secretariat for providing all the documents for this meeting, as well as for organizing the meeting in effective way. As has been said by the Thailand, we also would like to underline the importance of roles of UN ESCAP and this Ministerial Conference on Environmental and Development as a regional platform towards sustainable development within this region. This region is very important not only for our people of this region, but also for the globals and for the rest of the world. So I urge the UN ESCAP and under your leadership to continue good work and implementing affirmative action as well as multi-layer collaborative with not only with UN agencies but also with countries to ensure that our agenda will be effectively implemented. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Indonesia. Are there any other governments who wish to speak before I open the floor to intergovernmental bodies? I see none. Thank you for your kind attention. I will now open the floor to intergovernmental bodies. Are there any representatives of intergovernmental bodies who wish to speak before I open the floor to UN bodies and specialized agencies? I see none. I will now open the floor to UN bodies and specialized agencies. Are there any UN bodies and specialized agencies who wish to speak? None. I see none. I will now open the floor to major groups and other stakeholders in the order provided by the Secretariat. I now give the floor to ETC Group.
Thank you very much, Chair. I am from the Action Group on Erosion, Technology and Concentration based in the Philippines. I am speaking on behalf of the science and technology community and as part of the Asia-Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism, APRSEM. We welcome efforts to make the Ministerial Declaration more responsive to key challenges to resource efficiency in Asia-Pacific. The resolutions in the declaration are encouraging, but we urge member states to operationalize this into concrete actions to attain the lofty goals of MCED. To ensure transparent review and follow-up of implementation of these resolutions, we recommend for the review of progress to be aligned with the tools, indicators, and review framework adopted for the SDGs, especially relevant targets and indicators. This will help facilitate reporting by governments on progress of implementation of MCED resolutions in between the conferences every 5 years. We appreciate the resolution on sustainable agricultural practices and sustainable livelihoods in paras 18E and F, the central role of small-scale producers, fishers, livestock herders, and indigenous people, especially women, in ensuring food security primarily through agroecological practices that conserve biodiversity and protect natural ecosystems need to be recognized and supported to promote dynamic local economies based on sustainable livelihoods. 70% of the world's food needs are supplied by small-scale producers in both rural and urban areas worldwide. It is a sad irony that the people who feed us are the ones who are left behind and stay at the bottom. On technology in Para 19A, we expect that the technologies aspired for are not only hardware, not only high-tech, and not only new, but more importantly, the ability to access and benefit from proven technologies that promote resource efficiency by those who are left behind to address inequality. In our view, the most strategic aspect in transfer and use of environmentally sound technologies involves promoting and harnessing capacities to develop endogenous and indigenous technologies for resource efficiency within countries. This requires capacity building and appropriate facilitation from governments, research institutions, technology providers, and civil society organizations involved in local innovations. In addition, technology should not be viewed as a quick fix, but should be developed, diffused, and deployed, guided by the precautionary principle, and involving societal actors and evaluating potential opportunities and consequences to the environment and livelihood. Active people's participation in technology assessment could help ensure that technologies are gender responsive and address local needs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, representative of ETC Group. I now invite the representative from Asia Young Indigenous People Network.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Let me now take this opportunity to thank the governments that are actively participating here and in increasingly constructive manner. I would like to call for your attention to the voice, views, and recommendation of the more than 270 million indigenous people scattered around in the Asia-Pacific region calling for ecological and development justice. On this agenda item, I refer to the especially goal number 2, 13, 14, and 15 of the Sustainable Development Goals. And first and the foremost, I would like to emphasize that special measures and measurements are required to overcome the persistent marginalization of indigenous people with traditional knowledge and through sustainable natural resource management system. Indigenous people are actively contributing to the sustainable development and the environment. I strongly believe to end hunger, tackle climate change, and protect marine life and resources and biodiversity. It is an urgent and important task for the government of the Asia-Pacific region to take all the necessary measures, including to conduct the legislative and policy review to protect land and livelihood rights of indigenous people on contributing towards conservation of the environment. The land grabbing is getting increased in the Asia-Pacific region in enormous number these days by the state and business corporation. We take this increasing land grabbing as a key barrier to nourishing the land and producing food, protecting environment, and achieving the sustainable development goal in a natural, resource-friendly way. Madam Chair, we voice out to respect and recognize the contribution of the indigenous people on the protecting the environment and mentioning of the measures to promote and protect FPIC rights of indigenous people that has been stated in UN DRIP and Paris Climate Agreement on the draft ministerial declaration, which will secure rights to land, territories, and resources for the indigenous people, which is cross-cutting across the sustainable development goals. Recognition, protection, and promotion of the land rights will have the significant contribution to achieve not only the goal 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 13, 14, and 15 in particular, but also the whole sustainable goals in the general. I strongly believe that it is also crucial to ensure full and effective participation of the indigenous people and other stakeholders in the national development planning process, including identification and prioritization of the SDG target and indicators. Madam Chair, with this prevailing situation, we strongly recommend as follows here. Establishment of the permanent, open, and inclusive participatory mechanism and its implementation from local to national and international level, not only for the planning but also for monitoring, follow-up, and review of the environment and development policies and program. Consider and recognize indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge as with modern science and technology in protecting and preserving forests and biodiversity. Thank you for listening to the voice of indigenous people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative from Asia Young Indigenous People Network. I now invite the representative from Sikhodikon to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I speak on behalf of Sikhodikon India and Farmers Constituency of Asia Pacific Regional CSO's Engagement Mechanism. Madam Chair, while we welcome the declaration, we must also express that the declaration falls short of capturing the aspirations of not only farmers but also small food producers and significant part of the humanity which is concerned about sustainable agriculture, food safety, and food sovereignty. Many of us believe that despite stark warnings, we are still to make a very clear and explicit departure from the business as usual and corporate control of food and agricultural production and trade. Despite unimaginable loss of agricultural biodiversity, fertility of land available for food production, agroecological approaches, we are still not ready and willing to bring a reversal in the approaches which have caused problems in the first place. We are worried about the monumental problems of poisoning of land, air, water, and human health impacts due to pesticides and fertilizers, air and water pollution. We are also concerned about the rampant land grabbing, feminization of agriculture without providing women farmers enough access to land, credit, inputs, information, and identity as farmers. The system looks at farmers merely as agents of food production, which along with the climate change impact, falling prices, and volatility in the global food prices due to future trading in food derivatives, is alienating farmers from food production. The unequal terms of trade for developing countries, especially in agricultural trade, further erodes farmers' confidence in the institutions like the WTO, and a new wave of free trade agreements threaten to put in place WTO plus conditions. We are also particularly concerned about the application of untested and questionable technologies like genetic modification, synthetic biology, nanotechnology, big data, and artificial intelligence in agriculture and food production, and we identify that these technologies are undesirable, unethical, and unnecessary, which will benefit only few companies and industrial agriculture, and resist these false solutions. Domination of agriculture, trade, commodity by few agribusiness companies and mega mergers are further concentrating power and profits in fewer hands to the expense of the farmers and small food producers. We emphasize that the global crisis of sustainability, climate change, state and corporate impunity violates human rights of farmers and consumers as well. We urge all the governments in the region to take a step backward from the age-old maximization of production approach to minimization of risk for the benefits of farmers, land, food, inclusive and sustainable development, and for the entire planet. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much to the representative from Sikhodikon. I now give the floor to the representative from GCAP Youth, CENCAP.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We, the LGBTIQ constituency of the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism, met at the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Summit on Environment, issued the following statement. The UN definition of pollution may not all capture people's realities and how people in the communities experience it. While it is also important to reflect that there has been a growing understanding of the issues of our environment and of the problem of pollutions, still missing in the discourse is the acknowledgement and action on the root causes and drivers of these problems, which people's movement across the region repeatedly point to the profit-driven or business-as-usual framework of the global capitalist economy. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development ensuring no one is left behind, the Paris Agreement, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Samoa Pathway, the New Urban Development Agenda, and in particular the United Nations Secretary General Synthesis Report, paragraph 78, which states an enabling environment under the rule of law must be secure for the free, active, and meaningful engagement of civil society and advocates reflecting the voices of women, minorities, LGBT groups, indigenous people, youth, adolescents, and older people. All reiterate that the marginalized and most vulnerable groups are the utmost important stakeholders in decision-making processes, including capacity building. As LGBTIQ individuals, we are stigmatized, discriminated, and criminalized for our sexual orientations, gender identity and expressions, and sex characteristics. The United Nations Resolution on Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity A/HRC/RES/27/32, which is in line with report of the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, recognized that discriminatory laws and practices and acts of violence are perpetrated against individuals based on their sexual orientation and gender identity. A/HRC/19/41. Injustice from the current model of global development, exclusion from social and economic development, and are also victims of the natural and environmental disaster. We still have to carry the burden of the impact of natural disaster includes inter alia discrimination, social exclusion, and violence. We are concerned that equality, gender justice, and human rights values with non-discriminatory principles are not integrated in the negotiation of Asia-Pacific countries, and adherence to the basic principle of universality, interdependence, indivisibility, and interrelatedness of human rights as enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and consequently elaborated in other human rights instruments such as International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Lastly, for realization of development justice, we urge government to adopt new system of measuring environmental health which incorporates social dimension, including sexual and reproductive health and rights. We ask the government to increase opportunities for engagement with LGBTIQ communities, including mechanisms for social dialogue throughout policy and decision-making processes at all levels, and enhance participation of all relevant stakeholders so as to adopt policies that reflect their views and concern. We also ask that greater attention should be paid to access to environmental information, public participation in decision-making, and access to justice in environmental matters, which are universal environmental rights that reflect the essential element of sustainable development. We demand policy coherence and enforcement and coordination mechanism, and establishing a policy framework creating synergy in prevention of pollution and achieving Agenda 2030. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Representative of GCAP Youth, CENCAP. As we have no other statements, I wish to thank you all so much for very interesting remarks and for an excellent session. We will now move on to Agenda Item 5, which is Other Matters. I am asking distinguished delegates if there are any other matters that need to be discussed. As I see none, I will close the session and our discussion for today. I thank you once again for your insightful and interesting remarks and for an excellent session. I wish to remind you that tomorrow we will adopt the report of the senior officials under agenda item 11. The Secretariat will circulate the draft report shortly after noon for our review. And now, before we leave, I would like to invite our MC to make any announcements that she may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as we just heard, kindly be advised that agenda item 11, adoption of the report of the senior officials of the 7th Ministerial Conference on Environment and Development in Asia and the Pacific will take place tomorrow afternoon at 4:45 p.m. in Conference Room 2. The draft report will be circulated after lunch for review by delegates, and all documents are also uploaded to the summit website regularly. Tomorrow evening, the Carnegie Climate Geoengineering Governance Initiative, C2G2, warmly welcomes delegates to join an informal dinner reception to learn about the latest thinking on climate geoengineering. The dinner will take place in the reception hall on the ground floor of the conference center from 5:30 p.m. or after the end of the proceedings tomorrow. Thank you for your contributions today. We will resume tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you, MC. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are now adjourned for the day. Thank you very much, and Vinaka Vakalevu.
That was the most efficient chairmanship I've ever seen.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was very
โปรเจคเตอร์ปิดได้เลยป่ะได้เลยเนาะไม่เทียบแล้วเนาะ